The movie begins in Texas in 1939. A young boy named Bernard spends his days shining shoes outside a local bank. From where he works, he listens closely to every conversation about money and real estate investments, then writes everything down carefully in his small notebook. One day, he sneaks near a bank window to overhear an internal meeting, but a police officer spots him and drags him away. A short chase follows, and Bernard manages to escape, but the officer swears he'll tell his father. That night, his father scolds him harshly, warning him never to spy on white people, reminding him that black men have been lynched for far less. But when he sees the notebook, he admits his son is smart, though he warns him again that white people will never let him make money. Bernard, stubborn as ever, swears that one day he'll be rich. 15 years later, in Los Angeles in 1954, Bernard is now a married man with a wife named Eunice and a child. During a visit to her family, her uncle mentions that an airline is hiring black employees. Bernard turns down the offer, explaining that his focus is on real estate. His plan is to own property and make money from rent. Since they're renting a small cottage from Eunice's uncle, the man feels insulted and accuses Bernard of refusing to work. After dinner, Eunice defends him, saying her husband is a genius and that success is near. When they return to the cottage, she comforts Bernard, and he promises her that he'll get them out of this place soon. The next day, Bernard takes Eunice's cousin Tony with him. Tony's friend, Matt, notices Bernard's car and assumes he's wealthy. Tony jokingly tells him that Bernard owns buildings. Later, Bernard drives through white neighborhoods, checking out abandoned properties until he finds the perfect building. But he realizes that buying it will drain all his savings, leaving nothing for renovations. He and Eunice agree that he needs a partner. She suggests he meet Joe, her former boss. Joe welcomes them with his usual cheerful energy, joking nonstop. Bernard doubts his seriousness and refuses to work with him. They leave without even pitching their idea. As soon as they walk out, they see the governor himself arriving to visit Joe, who turns out to be a close friend of his. Even that doesn't change Bernard's mind. A few days later, Bernard meets Patrick, the owner of the property he wants to buy. He asks for a $10,000 loan to cover renovation costs, but Patrick refuses, backing his decision with math. Bernard quickly spots mistakes in his calculations and corrects them on the spot, impressing Patrick, though he still refuses to lend him the money. Before Bernard leaves, he notices a calendar on Patrick's desk, sent by someone named Reed from Mid-City Bank. Bernard goes to the bank asking to meet Reed, but the secretary claims Reed is busy, even though Bernard can clearly see him sitting behind his desk. He realizes the reason is purely racial. Instead of giving up, he waits outside the bank. When Reed finally steps out, Bernard rushes to him and pitches his idea, a deal that would benefit both Patrick and the bank. At home, Bernard tells Eunice that he failed to secure the funding. But just then, the phone rings. It's Patrick. He found out that Bernard used his name when speaking to Reed. Reed had asked Bernard if he thought what he did was appropriate business conduct. Bernard said no. Patrick smiles. He likes people who break the rules just like him. He tells Bernard that tomorrow he can go to the bank and take the loan. He'll personally guarantee it. Bernard and Eunice went out to celebrate at a nightclub, but Joe suddenly showed up and started joking around as usual, which only made Bernard more annoyed with him. The next day, Bernard and Tony began renovating the property. An elderly tenant from the white neighborhood noticed them and frowned at their presence. Bernard explained that he was the new owner, but she refused to believe him. Soon after, Matt arrived to help them. Bernard asked if he had a problem working for a black man, and Matt laughed, saying the only color he cared about was green. The three of them started their day full of energy and determination. It didn't take long before 2 police officers showed up after the old woman filed a complaint. But as soon as Bernard showed them the ownership papers, they left without saying a word. When the renovations were done, Bernard moved his family into one of the apartments. The next morning, the old lady packed up and left, refusing to live near a black family. But soon after, black tenants started moving in, and within days, the whole building was fully occupied. Patrick was impressed by Bernard's success and offered him a partnership. They agreed that Bernard would choose the properties, thanks to his sharp instinct, while Patrick would be the public face of the business to avoid racial discrimination. They shook hands and agreed to split the profits 50-50. Over the following weeks, the two bought more buildings, and their business flourished. Matt and Tony joined them in the renovations, while Eunice handled the interior design with her refined taste. One day, Bernard asked her for ideas to decorate a luxury home, then happily revealed that it was actually their new house. But the joy didn't last long. Not long after, Patrick was found dead in his bed. At the funeral, his wife announced that she wanted to end the partnership and offered Bernard only 25% of the profits. Bernard objected, reminding her that their agreement was for half. But the lawyer explained that Bernard's name wasn't on any legal documents, so he could either accept the offer or walk away with nothing. He added that the only way to prove the agreement was to bring a witness. Bernard went to the bank hoping to meet Reed, but Reed refused to see him. As Bernard was leaving, he noticed a sign that gave him an idea about how much space the bank actually needed. He immediately went to Joe and pitched his bold plan: to buy the banker's building so that any bank would be forced to lend them money to purchase properties. Joe liked the idea but hesitated, saying no one would ever sell to a black man. So they decided to hire Matt to act as their public face. Matt was hesitant since he knew nothing about real estate and backed out even after they promised to support him. Later, Matt sat in a small diner, still unsure about what to do. The waitress, Susie, asked if he was okay, and he explained his new opportunity. She didn't just admire it, she inspired confidence in him. Suddenly, Matt stood up, ran back to Bernard and Joe, and accepted their offer. His training began with learning how to talk to wealthy people. Joe took them to a golf course at 6 in the morning so Matt could master the game. Before long, they were joined by Donald, a banker and friend of Joe's, who agreed to lend them $2 million. Bernard assured him that they would buy the building for less than expected. After that, Bernard taught Joe the basics of finance, because money can't be managed by instinct alone. As for Matt, math was his biggest struggle, but he refused to quit. For weeks he trained hard on both golf and math. At first he stumbled, but his confidence grew day by day until he impressed everyone with a perfect golf shot straight into the hole, followed by a flawless calculation without hesitation. That day, he bought his first formal suit. Joe taught him how to raise his glass like a gentleman, while Eunice coached him on table manners and refined conversation. And, in a defining moment, Matt solved a complex mental equation while playing golf. At that point, Bernard and Joe looked at him and knew he was finally ready. The next step was to put the plan into action. The Target building was owned by Charles, a wealthy man who spent most of his time at an exclusive country club playing golf. Joe arranged for Matt to enter the club as a guest, while he posed as Matt's driver to make him appear rich and important. Using his golf skills, Matt impressed everyone at the club and managed to arrange a private meeting with Charles in his office. He spent an entire week training with Joe and Bernard until he memorized every number and calculation by heart. During the meeting, he answered every question confidently, pretending to do the math in his head on the spot. Charles was impressed and agreed to sell the building for $1,560,000. The team celebrated their success, then began redesigning the offices. Their relationship with bankers grew stronger, and loans began to flow easily. They bought luxury properties in the most exclusive white neighborhoods, and their business thrived like never before. With financial stability finally achieved, Matt married Susie. Within just a few months, the three partners became the biggest real estate investors in the state. They even met the Vice President of the United States. In 1963, Bernard returned to Texas with his family to visit his father. The old man welcomed him with overwhelming joy and told him how proud he was of what he had accomplished. The next day, they went out for a walk, and the father had to explain why there were two separate drinking fountains, one for whites and one for blacks. When they reached the corner near the old bank, Bernard stopped and asked a young shoeshiner to clean his shoes. But the boy refused, saying he didn't serve black people. Bernard looked at the bank where he had learned everything, and a spark of inspiration lit up in his mind. When he returned to Los Angeles, he told Joe that he wanted to buy that bank in Texas. Joe immediately objected, saying they knew nothing about running banks, that the business was complicated, and that people in Texas would never accept a black man in a position of power. But Bernard explained that they would use Matt as the public face once again. He pointed out a huge untapped market, millions of black Americans who were denied access to loans. After a long argument, Joe reluctantly agreed, not wanting to lose his partnership with Bernard. Still, he didn't hide his opinion, calling the idea simply a bad one. Later, the banker Donald helped Matt officially purchase the Texas bank on behalf of Bernard and Joe. As part of the deal, the previous owner and his son, Robert, kept 20% of the shares. Bernard began touring black communities across Texas, announcing that the bank was finally open to them. But he asked for complete secrecy, since racism was still deeply rooted, and many people would not accept such a change. All the loans went through Matt, while Bernard worked quietly behind the scenes. Soon, new black-owned businesses began to flourish throughout the area. After 3 months, Robert, who still worked at the bank, noticed the massive wave of loans Matt was approving. He couldn't understand where all these new clients were coming from. He tried questioning Matt, but Matt dodged his questions. Robert's suspicion grew until he started following him, and one day he caught Matt meeting Bernard. He took photos of them together as proof. That night, Matt came home exhausted. Susie surprised him with a painful confession: she hated Texas. Then she added bitterly that Matt was only earning a salary, even though he had promised her he'd be a real partner. The next day, Robert suddenly showed up at Bernard's house, where he found Bernard, Matt, and Joe in a meeting. He said frankly that he didn't mind working for black men, but he was afraid everything would collapse if the townspeople discovered the truth. Then he showed them the reason for his visit: an official letter from the Treasury Department announcing an inspection in 1 month, following anonymous complaints that the bank was issuing too many high-risk loans. After Robert left, Matt took his friends to a small bank in the neighborhood. He shared his idea. They should buy that bank, and he would manage it officially. That way, they could distribute the loans smartly between the two institutions, reducing risks and protecting themselves from the inspection. With this plan, the loan numbers would look less suspicious during the inspection. But Joe and Bernard hesitated, saying they didn't have the experience to pull off something so risky. Matt firmly declared that he would only continue helping if he became an official partner. With no other choice, they agreed. Soon after, Matt bought the small bank. On the first day, Eunice pretended to be a cleaning lady so she could observe what was happening inside. Meanwhile, Tommy and Bernard drove around the city, deciding which loans should go to which bank. That evening, the team met Matt at a restaurant to go over the details. They were shocked to see the restaurant's sign vandalized with hateful, racist graffiti. The next day, Matt signed all the official papers with a lawyer. A few days later, Robert called to warn him that some white clients were pulling out their deposits because they believed the bank was owned by the Colored Advancement Association. That night, Bernard showed Joe a racist sign he had found inside the bank. He explained that 5 white clients had already withdrawn all their money, while Robert managed to convince 9 others to stay. Joe immediately grew suspicious that maybe Robert himself was the one spreading the rumors. A few days later, a federal inspector from the central bank arrived at the small bank to review the records. Matt called Bernard right away for help, but Bernard knew they wouldn't let a black man into that meeting. Eunice suggested that he pretend to be a janitor. He refused at first, so she reminded him that she had done it many times before. He replied, "That's different, you're a woman." Eunice got furious and compared his words to the same nonsense white people said about black people. Bernard realized his mistake, put on a janitor's uniform, and sneaked inside. He started mopping the floor near Matt's office door, trying to signal him somehow, but the inspector shut the door to prevent any outside interference. Bernard had no choice but to walk away. Inside, the inspector began pointing out serious inconsistencies in Matt's statements. Matt quickly made up an excuse to leave, saying he needed a file from the archives. He ran to the bathroom, where his friends were waiting, and they gave him urgent advice. But when he returned, the inspector had already found major errors in the records that couldn't be explained. Matt ran back to the bathroom with the files, and Bernard immediately reviewed them, discovering the same mistakes himself. Joe wondered how Donald could have overlooked such things. Matt hesitated, then confessed that he had hired a new lawyer to speed things up, and that lawyer had been recommended by Robert. In a heavy silence, Bernard and Joe finally realized the painful truth. Robert hadn't been hesitant or nervous at all. He had been planning their downfall from the very start. That night, Bernard told Eunice about his final decision. They would sell 27 bad loans and pay off all the losses from their own pockets, costing about $300,000. Later, Bernard and Joe informed Matt that they would no longer cover for him. They told him they were at greater risk than he was, and since the idea of buying the bank was his, the responsibility should also be his. The next morning, Donald called Joe with shocking news. His bank had just purchased all the loans from Matt's bank. Joe and Bernard rushed to Matt's office, furious and demanding an explanation. Matt told them it was only a temporary fix to buy time to correct the records. But the two warned him that what he was doing was outright fraud. At that moment, officials from the U.S. Treasury Department entered and announced that the bank's license had been revoked. Matt was escorted out of his office, and all clients were ordered to leave. The bank was officially shut down until further notice. As soon as Joe and Bernard stepped outside, FBI agents approached and arrested them without giving a reason. Bernard shouted that it was pure racism and tried to resist, but they quickly overpowered him and took him away. After some time in Washington, a lawyer informed Joe and Bernard that the state banking charges had been dropped, but the federal charges were still pending. He explained that a senator from Arkansas was holding hearings about weak oversight in banks and suspected that he was using the case for political gain. He also mentioned that this might be their chance to get the federal charges dismissed too. Meanwhile, Matt was offered a deal. His charges would be dropped if he agreed to testify against his friends. Days later, he appeared in court, detailing Joe and Bernard's plans and claiming he was just an employee who had been manipulated by them. Then the judge gave Bernard 2 options. Either admit that he had used lenient rules to build his wealth, which would grant him immunity and give Congress a reason to reform the system, or insist on the truth, where his testimony would be measured against white witnesses. And if the court believed he was lying, he would be sent straight to prison. After the hearing, Bernard went for a walk with Eunice and shared his fear that if he accepted immunity, he would never expose the real injustice faced by black people in the banking system. She told him she would stand by him no matter what he chose. Before entering the courtroom, he met with Joe, and they remembered all the years of struggle they had faced together. During his testimony, Bernard said in a steady voice that the founding documents of this nation declare all men are created equal, but the law does not reflect that. Ignoring all warnings, he held up the janitor's uniform he had once worn in secret and said, "If a man is denied a loan, how can he start a business? How can he buy a home? Isn't that a betrayal of the American dream?" In the end, the government seized all of Joe and Bernard's assets, and they were sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. They lost all their properties, except for one house that remained under Eunice's name. As for Robert, he reclaimed the bank at a very cheap price. When they were released from prison, Eunice was surprised to see them laughing. They told her the secret. Before Matt testified against them, he had secretly met with them and explained that refusing to cooperate would have cost him 50 years behind bars. So they allowed him to betray them. And in return, Matt bought 2 houses in the Bahamas before the government could seize their money. Thanks to their bold testimony before Congress, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed, making it illegal to deny the sale or rental of property based on race, religion, or gender. And that's how the movie ends. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Have a great evening, wherever you are. See you in the next recap.